Communications Association, Asia Pacific. But before we formally begin, I want us to take a moment for us to interact. So I want you to drop your name, your title, and where you are joining from into the chat. I want to see this room fill up from Accra, from Lagos, from Nairobi, Singapore, Sao Paulo, wherever you are. Let us know you are here. So just keep your name, your way up, the country that you are joining us from, and let's take it from there. Yeah, I have Olamide joining from Lagos. I hope your name is well pronounced. I have Abina, also from Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, Olamide and Amina. Yeah, I can also see Vicky joining from Singapore. Welcome. I see Liz from Hong Kong. I see Vicky. Yes, then I see Tulu, I hope I got the name right, also from Nigeria, and that's the founder for PRWS. All right, so Lars is here from Singapore. I also have Jeremy. Jeremy is here, who is a keynote speaker. I can see Dana from Singapore as well. It looks like the Singapore team is representing up here strongly. And I can see Omobolaji from Nigeria as well. So now it's between Singapore and Nigeria. Let's see, where are my Ghana folks? Let's see. You are all welcome. And yes, I can also see Oluwasin from Nigeria. Welcome, everyone. We still have 1 more minute to connect here, and your name, just put in your name and where you are joining, the country that you are joining from, for us to interact. So as I mentioned, Nigeria and Singapore is representing here. Ghana, Kenya, Namibia, Gambia, anyone. Please put in your name and the country you are joining us from, and let's interact. All right, we will continue with this session as guests joining us. But let me just give a brief context for this session. So as you are aware, the session is the grand finale of our 5-part webinar series commemorating the 5th anniversary of the Experiencing PRR Global Summit. What began as a vision to connect, inspire, and advance conversations around public relations has grown into a thriving platform, and we are deeply grateful to each of you for being part of this remarkable journey. Today's theme is one close to my heart as a communications practitioner: Beyond Aid, leveraging PR to amplify stories of success from emerging markets. So for over the next 2 hours, we are going to interrogate a simple but urgent idea that how our markets are narrated determines how they are invested in, partnered with, and respected. And I will end this opening by saying that narrative is not a decoration, but economic infrastructure. We will delve into this, the theme more, but before we start everything, I'm going to invite PRWF representative, and it's in the person of Stella Okos-Oboje, who is the PRWF Programs and Membership Lead. She drives the foundation's programs and member engagement with a background spanning PR, social media management, community management, and project management. She is passionate about building connection, creating value-driven experiences, and supporting initiatives that inspire growth and positive change. Stella, if you are ready, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Angela. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. We really appreciate you From the first webinar series to the fifth, it has been really impactful and insightful. And we are grateful to all our speakers and our partner, and to our partner for this summit, PRCA APAC. Really appreciate your partnership and your support. My name is Stella Okosiboje, and I am the Programs and Membership Lead for PRWF. We're also known as the Foundation, and we are a global social impact enterprise, strengthening the practice, leadership, and economic relevance of public relations by building elite communities, globally mobile pipelines, and high-level community platforms for communications professionals and institutions. So when we say elite communities, we have our Premium Members Club for senior women in public relations and communications in Africa and in Asia. We also have Talent Intel, where we provide talent for organizations in Africa and in Asia, because our focus is emerging markets. And then we have training and convenings. The Experiencing Public Relations is one of our convening. It's our annual convening. And this year was the 5th anniversary. And for 2027, we're really excited because planning is on the way. I will be having a 3-day summit. We'll share more details with everyone on the call, but we're really excited about the impact that the convening sets to create, and it's creating in the industry. Again, it is a business conference. It is a business conference, and we are driving the importance of public relations across Africa and Asia. So thank you all once again for joining. My name is Stella Okosiboje, and PRWF is a convener of Experiencing PR. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you. Thank you for setting the context up for us. And this gives us a perfect one for us to move ahead. Just a shout out from people who are joining. I have a Ebenezer from Ghana. At least I can see Ghana here. They are waiting for more people to join. As you join, just drop your name in the chat and then let's welcome you. So now we will turn to our valued global partners. Please let's welcome Tara Muniz, head of the PRCA Asia. And let me just remind us that this 5th edition of Experiencing PR Global Summits, Webinar 5, is being held in partnership with Public Relations and Communications Association, Asia Pacific, in short, PRCA. And their presence here reflects something important. This conversation about emerging market narrative is not a usual conversation. It is a global one. Therefore, Tara, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angela. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah. Right. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all on the final event for the Experiencing PR Global Summit, and particularly for this important conversation. On behalf of PRCA Asia Pacific, I'd like to thank PRWF for bringing us together and also for inviting us to be part of this summit. We're very pleased to be partnering with you for the finale of this year's summit, and I think tonight's topic is a particularly fitting one for us as an organization working across such a diverse and dynamic region, such as the APAC region. Now, for those who might not be familiar with PRCA APAC, I'll just give you a quick background. We launched in 2018. Initially, we had a focus of Southeast Asia, and since then, we've grown significantly, both in the markets we represent and in the breadth of the work that we do. Today, PRCA APAC brings together in-house comms teams, agencies, organizations, practitioners across the region. And our aim is quite simple. It's to support, to strengthen, and just to be there for the public relations and comms profession in this region, while also creating opportunities for our members and the wider industry to connect, to share best practice, and also to learn. And I think that the APAC region really does give us an interesting environment in which to do that in. As I'm sure you're aware, it's a very diverse region, culturally, economically, politically, We have some of the world's most established economies alongside some of the fastest growing emerging markets as well, from global businesses to startups, NGOs, governments, communities, all trying to communicate their stories and, make themselves heard. And that is one thing I think makes PR so important here. It's not just about getting attention, but it's also about building understanding, creating trust, and shaping how organizations, industries, and even countries are perceived. And again, that's why tonight's theme does really resonate with PRCA APAC. Now, the Beyond Aid asks us to look beyond some of the traditional narratives that have historically surrounded emerging markets. And I believe that it's saying instead of focusing on the stories of innovation, resilience, and growth that are happening across these markets every day. So, as I mentioned before, we've grown since 2018 when we launched, and so has the breadth of what we do. We run events, training, professional development, specialist groups, awards initiatives, and also events to support the next generation of communications. Tonight's discussion is a great opportunity to look at how we can use PR to amplify success and also to ensure more of the incredible stories coming out of the emerging markets are heard and recognized globally. So once again, thank you very much, PRWF, for partnering with PRCA APAC, and also to everyone joining us today. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that it gives you some new perspectives on the role that we can all play in shaping the narratives around emerging markets. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tara. And thank you for a strong reminder that we are a diverse region, or there is a diverse region out there, and we need to look beyond traditional narratives. We need to get our organizations, our stories heard and recognized. So then, thank you so much. We move into introduction of our summit. So I would start by saying that our theme, as we all know, Beyond Aid, leveraging PR to amplify stories of success from emerging markets, challenge us to rethink the narrative surrounding these markets. Most conversations, as Tyra mentioned, in developing economies are often centered on challenges, dependency, and need for assistance. And you will agree with me that these economies continue to drive innovation, attract and deliver transformative outcomes, and that calls for the elevation of our narratives to reflect opportunity, resilience, and growth. So today, we explore how strategic PR can shape global perceptions around these markets. And at the end of the session, the objective being action, storytelling, and strategic engagement can position emerging markets as centers for sustainable economic progress. So stay tuned, get interactive as we delve deeper into the session. It is now time for our keynote address. And before I do that, let me welcome Obianju, Iwalola, and then Shine, all from Nigeria. Welcome and welcome everyone. So let me say something small about, let me tell you something small about the person who is joining us today. Okay. So apologies for the break. So our keynote speaker is in the person of Jeremy Seow. He is the chair of Public Relations APAC and a senior communications leader with more than 20 years of experience Across Asia Pacific, his work spans corporate reputation, issues management, integrated communications, digital transformation, and agency leadership. Over his career journey, Jeremy has held senior roles across leading agencies, including Allison, Archetype, Edelman, Fleshman Hillard, Ogilvy, We Communications, and Zeno Group, advising global and regional brands such as Google, Microsoft, TikTok, Adobe, Intel, Lenovo, Tencent, and many more, including Standard Chartered, GSK, and then Aiden and Kyndryl. He is particularly interested in the future of communications, the evolution of agency and in-house teams, and how technology is shaping the role of communication leaders. So that is Jeremy for you. And without wasting much time, Jeremy, kindly take over and then give us all the insights you have to share with us.
Thank you. Angela, can you hear me?
Yes, you can be heard.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again. And first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I have to say, it's a real honor to be given a chance to be at the last session of the series. And we at PRCA are very excited to be able to partner on this. And I think that, you know, when I was thinking of what I wanted to talk about, I kept coming back to stories, not storytelling as a craft. And I think we talk about that a lot in our profession, but something that comes before that. And I was thinking how we decide which stories matter in the first place. And that was what I kept coming back to. And then who gets to make that decision? So I've titled this session, The Stories Only We Can See, because I've come to believe that where we stand gives us a particular view of the world. We see things others don't, but sometimes, strangely, being so close to something can also make it harder to see. And I've been doing this for close to 30 years, and that tension has really followed me through much of my career. I spent most of my working life in places the world calls emerging. Over time, I've become less interested in the label itself, but more interested in what that label makes us see. And then what does it, or what makes us miss? So if language creates frames, and frames shape what is important, then I feel that sometimes the most interesting story is the one that we walk straight past because it doesn't fit the story that we are expected to find. What we mean on this, let me tell you why. So back in the mid-2000s, I worked at Yahoo. And we work on a program with the Department of Education in the Philippines. Back then, you got to remember, this was around 2007. It was my first in-house role. We helped equip schools with computer labs because internet access wasn't so prevalent back then, right? So at that time, that mattered in a very practical way. Internet access was uneven, and so for many students, the school computer lab was one of the few places they could get online, learn basic digital skills, access information beyond the classroom. But then what was more interesting was what happened outside school hours. Because putting computers in the school was only part of the problem. As you know, the equipment had to be maintained. Connectivity, cost money, a lot of money, especially back then, in relative to those times. Machines eventually broke. And so if the program relied entirely on the original donation, there was always a risk that the impact would fade once the funding stopped. So during the week, those computers served students. At weekends, the same labs would operate as an internet cafe for the surrounding community. And we had multiple of this in multiple communities and provinces in the Philippines. People would come in, pay a small fee, use the computer, access the internet, and the revenue would help maintain the facilities and support other school programs. It's been more than 20 years, and what I remember now is not really the technology, it's the thinking behind the model. One room, one set of computers, two different users, and a very practical attempt to make the investment sustain itself. However, at that time, I think we probably knew exactly how to tell that story. In 2008, it was all about technology access, education, digital inclusion, bridging the digital divide. Yahoo was doing something useful in the community, a CSR story. And I just want to say, to be clear, all of those things were true. But looking back now, I'm not sure I fully saw what was most interesting about it. Because the real innovation wasn't simply the presence of computers, it was the operating model around them. The schools had taken assets that could otherwise sit unused for part of the week and found a way to make it work harder. It created another use case, another source of value, and most importantly, a mechanism to make the program more sustainable over time. And the uncomfortable part is that I was one of those people telling the story through a more obvious frame at that time. I look back and I was thinking to myself, I wasn't standing outside the system thinking, why are people describing this the wrong way? Back then, I was part of the comms machinery helping to shape that story. And upon reflection, it matters to me now because it reminds me that framing is not always something imposed on us by someone else. And sometimes, for whatever reason, where we come from, our lives and our surroundings, we inherit that frame so completely that we stop noticing that we are using it. So now when I look back at the same program, I realize I might, or if given a chance, I will tell that story quite differently. You see, my fellow comms professionals, if that exact same idea had emerged in Silicon Valley, we might have called it asset utilization or business model innovation. But in a Philippine school, we are more likely to call it a development story. Again, same facts, same intelligence, just different frame. And for the next 10 minutes, that's the tension I want to explore today. You see, I've walked across Asia for close to 3 decades, and I heard the phrase emerging markets thousands of times. And I'm sure many of you in your region would have heard that as well. And every time I hear that, there's a voice at the back of my head. Ever so often, I find myself asking a slightly awkward question. Emerging into what? What exactly is the destination? Who decided what the finished version looks like? Because that phrase often carries an assumption that there is a single path of development. Some markets are further along this journey. And yes, some are somewhere behind, moving towards the same destination. But that has never matched what I've seen. I work in markets described as emerging that were light years ahead of so-called mature economies in payments, commerce, logistics, infrastructure, and technology adoption. So I'm not arguing that the term is factually wrong. The terminology is less interesting to me than the lens that it creates for us as comms professional. Once we describe a market as emerging, we begin to look for certain things: progress, catch up, risk, growth, development, potential. And the problem is not always that the old stories were false. It's that they became the dominant lens which everything else was then being told. And once that one lens becomes dominant, genuinely different models can end up being described as earlier or later versions of somebody else's future. Look, I'm not trying to say that we blame mature markets for telling our stories badly. Historically, some of that is true. But somewhere along the way, we learned the language too. We celebrated, foreign investments, rankings, unicorns, international awards, and global validation. Again, I don't think those things are wrong. But they raise a harder question. How often have we allowed somebody else's definition of significance to determine what we think matters? And what if the most important story in your market doesn't look important from London or New York? What if there's no giant funding round, no international award, no external validation? What if it looks ordinary because you live next to it every day? My fellow communicators, we've seen this repeatedly in technology. For years, Asia platforms were introduced through Western analogies. The Uber of Southeast Asia, the WhatsApp of China, the Amazon of somewhere else. And to be fair, that shorthand was useful. If you are explaining in an unfamiliar company to an international audience, giving them something they understood made the story easier to understand or grasp. But I think about it, and I hope you do too, it does reveal something about the frame. We tend to recognize innovation more easily when it resembles something we already know. But then those businesses evolve. They become ecosystems, combining transport, payments, food, commerce, financial services, everyday utilities in ways that no longer fit the original comparison. So at some point, the local version stopped being a version of anything. It had become its own model. I see a couple of members from Nigeria, right? I think you can see similar dynamics in Nigeria's financial services. Digital-first banks and fintech platforms have been built around mobile behavior due to fragmented infrastructure and very different customer needs. The mature markets have used, and the easy description of what they use is they are digital versions of traditional banks. What if that's already the wrong frame? What if they are showing us what banking looks like when you design it around a mobile-first customer from the very beginning, rather than digitizing a branch-based model afterwards? That's the shift I'm interested in. So to me, the question is not always whether an emerging market is catching up to an existing model. Sometimes the more interesting question is whether it's creating the model others will eventually follow. There's another trap here. When we try to move away from statistics, GDP, or investment numbers, or corporate success stories, we can easily swing towards another familiar kind of narrative: struggle, resilience, and overcoming hardship, adversity, hardship. And those stories absolutely matter. They are extraordinary stories of people and communities overcoming very real difficulty. But humanity is much larger than hardship. Human life contains ambition, humor, beauty, music, food, sports, obsession, generosity, creativity, contradiction, and joy. But I don't think we tell those stories equally. Sometimes I read the news and I go like, mature markets are allowed to tell stories about a chef, a fashion movement, a strange subculture, a ridiculous business idea, a musician, an eccentric founder, a luxury brand, nightlife, or just people having fun. No one asked. I don't see that being asked in the news. What developmental problem those stories solve? And I mean this for mature markets. What developmental problems do those stories solve for these mature markets? They are allowed to be interesting because they are interesting. And when I start thinking about how the news coming from a frame of a mature market, there's always an expectation for us to demonstrate progress. There's no news if we don't show someone overcoming something or a company overcoming something or a solved development problem or proving that this market is modernizing. And if we're not careful, even the word resilience becomes part of that frame. So I mean, I can't help but ask, why must people always be resilient? Sometimes they're just simply talented. Sometimes they're just funny. Sometimes they're just creating something brilliant. Sometimes they're just living. So maybe the real confidence is when our stories no longer have to prove that we're progressing, but they can simply reveal who we are. I think a lot about this, especially when I start thinking about the evolution of our profession. And there's an advantage to being close to the story. You understand the context. You know why people behave the way they do. You recognize the small details an outsider might dismiss or misunderstand. You know that the workaround isn't necessarily a workaround. There's a saying, I'm not going to put a spin on this. And of course, sometimes it is the innovation. And I feel that sometimes that is something people outside a market often struggle to see. They arrive with a frame, we have the context, but it's a catch, right? There's a catch. Being close to something doesn't automatically mean that we see it better. Sometimes the opposite happens. The things around us become so familiar that we stop noticing what's unusual about them. And then they become ordinary to us. And that takes me something I think matters a lot for our profession. We often describe communications professionals as storytellers, and I understand why. But I think it puts the emphasis slightly too far downstream. The way I see it, before storytelling really is noticing. The ability to say, what are we walking past? What feels too ordinary to mention? Why would someone completely outside the market misunderstand this completely. For our profession, curiosity is not just a personality trait. It is a professional capability. So my friends, if we want to really tell different stories, we first have to become better at seeing them. And I think this is why and where our profession really matters. We spend a lot of time talking about content, channels, storytelling, engagement, reach, and increasingly technology. All of those matters, 100%. But before all of them sits judgment. Judgment is deciding what matters before deciding what to say. It's asking what is actually significant here. What is noise? Which stakeholder changes the meaning of the situation? What context cannot be moved without distorting the story? Whose perspective is missing? What deserves amplification? Sometimes why we should just leave it alone. But also sometimes the judgment is simply recognizing the obvious story is not the right story. To me, that was true of the Yahoo example. The obvious story was access to technology. The more interesting story, at least to me now, was the operating model. That distinction matters because the visible communications was the only output. The press release, the campaign, the speech, the blog post, that was what people see. But our value as communicators is often the decision that happens before any of that. What matters? Why does it matter to whom and what happens if we frame it one way rather than the other? And that, my fellow professionals, is judgment. And as we're talking about all of this, AI changes the environment around all of this, right? As you know, research now becomes easier, drafting becomes easier, translation becomes easier, creating images easier, adapting one piece of content to 10 different formats becomes easier. A lot of things became easier. Which I would say reasonably convincing storytelling becomes available at a extraordinary scale. And that matters because for a long time, comms teams have been organized around production constraints. Research took time, writing took time, translation took time, creating assets took time, distribution took time. And so I love it that AI attacks many of those constraints directly. So I urge many of you to stand behind me to say our future value cannot simply rest on being better producers of communication. Production will become abundant. Content will become abundant. Even competent storytelling will become abundant. But meaning is not. Trust is not. Attention is not. And certainly judgment is not. Many of you will still have to decide what deserves attention. Many of you will have to recognize what particular detail changes the story. Someone like you will have to understand the cultural context or have to know when the obvious narrative is wrong. AI can help massively with the work that comes after that decision. Because as everything downstream gets easier, the value of upstream judgment becomes more important, not less. And there's another consequence of AI that I think matters a lot for this conversation. 20, 30 years ago, one of the challenges for emerging markets was that someone else might tell your story for you. You know, that global media organization. the investor, the multinational, the development institution, those bodies and organizations that had greater reach and greater power to define the frame. Today, we're moving to a world where a machine may tell your story based on what everyone else has already written. And that's a slightly different problem because these systems do not arrive with some perfectly balanced understanding of every place, culture, or community. They work from the information environment that already exists, from what's been published, digitized, indexed, repeated. So if the available record contains a shallow, repetitive, or outdated version of the market, AI does not really correct that. It may synthesize it, it may reproduce it. There's less editors that can make a judgment call on whether it appears on a news website. And because AI can operate at such enormous scale, it may amplify that frame far more efficiently than any single journalist or institution that ever could. So now, representation becomes more than just a reputation issue. The stories we choose to surface today become part of the source material from which the future understanding is built. Think of it as a historian. We need to start documenting all the good stuff. And so that is why I think communicators have a responsibility that goes beyond the campaign in front of us. We're not just managing what people think of our organizations today. We are also contributing, however modestly, to the record of how our markets and societies are understood tomorrow. Back again to being part of a historian. So 20 years later, I could not tell you the specs of those computers in the Philippines, other than they were Dell. I do not remember the press release. I can't even remember how exactly we described the program at that time. Or what, yeah. Or what we titled it. But I do remember the idea. Monday to Friday, school computer lab. Weekend, internet cafe. One asset, two purposes. Built around the reality of people who actually had to make it work. And I keep coming back to that because I wonder how many stories like that we are standing next to today without really seeing them. What is happening in your organization, your market, or your community that looks ordinary only because you are too close to it? That's a question I'm going to leave you. Because maybe emerging markets were never short of stories. Maybe sometimes we're just short of the confidence to decide for ourselves which ones really matter. Again, I just want to say thank you so much for this, ladies and gents. So let's all try to look again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Great point. Relatable examples, and what are not the test. And as businesses are evolving, we will have so many stories. We shouldn't just overlook it, but tell it as it is. Thank you very much, Jeremy. This is exactly a global vantage point we needed before we ground this conversation to emerging markets related. And we are appreciative of that. I think we had a few people join us. You are all welcome. And before we move into our fireside chat, let us just drop some key points each of us picked in the chat box so that we can encourage ourselves and remind ourselves of what Jeremy, the key pointers Jeremy shared. So let your whatever you picked up keep flowing in the chat. Thank you very much. So we move on to our next session, which is our photo ops with our speakers, our representatives, and then our partners. And may I ask our speakers, that's the PRWF representative, PRCA representative, and our speakers to turn on their cameras whilst we capture the shot of everyone who has made today possible, just for a brief moment. So please turn on your cameras. Great. And technical team, let me know when we are done with this, so we move to our next item. Great. Someone is saying my key point is that's Oluwashin says my key point is that beyond the programs and campaigns we are working on to shift the narrative of our organization, we are building the frame from which data will be drawn in the future. So beautiful. And someone is Omonoi saying that thank you, Jeremy. That was an illuminating presentation. And then the people closer to the story often see what others cannot see. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and thank you, team FL delegates, for sharing the insight. So we will be moving to our next item, which is spotlighting our technical partners. And then the next voice will come from our technical partner for the summit, and that is Tech for Development. Over the years, Tech for Development has consistently supported Experiencing PR Global Summit, and we are much grateful. Please, let's welcome Isosa Otu, the storytelling associate at Tech for Development or Tech for Dev, to share a few words. Isosa, please take over.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Esosa Otu. Yeah. So my name is Esther Otu, storytelling associate at Tech for Dev, technology for social change and development. So basically, our main core focus at Tech for Dev is building pathways to economic prosperities. So we're building pathways to economic prosperity for underserved populations globally through digital and technology skills and knowledge. And we do this by delivering lasting inclusive impact through provision of equitable access to quality technology products and engineering and creative experiential skilling, mentorship, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship opportunities. We are also grounded in rigorous research, strengthened by advocacy and a supportive global community, resulting in influencing public policy for change. And our core vision, like I mentioned before, is to create economic prosperity for young, underserved populations across the world. Our approach at Tech for Dev is we go beyond teaching digital and technology skills. We equip individuals and communities with future-ready skills and provide access to mentorship and career pathways that connect them to job and entrepreneurship opportunities that drive economic mobility and long-term prosperity, basically. Our values at Tech for Dev, of course, integrity, inclusivity, and equity, excellence, innovation, social impact, and collaboration. I'll be dropping the link to our website in the chat just in case if you'd like to read more about what we do at Tech for Dev and who we are at Tech for Dev. We always have programs running. I think currently we have programs, but this is just focused on the North Central region, where young adults from North Central can actually learn skills and position them in a great pathway to acquiring job opportunities. Without wasting much of your time, I hope I'll be able to give like a basis of what we do at Tech for Dev. Like I mentioned, I'll also drop the link to our site so you can see who we are and what we do. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. Building pathways for economic prosperity, and that ties in too well for our team. Thank you so much, Tech for your support. May I ask that for our speakers and our partners, we turn on our cameras again so that we take our picture. We have to retake it again. So kindly put on your videos and then let's do it again. While we do that, I think I can read some of the messages that are coming. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for this great presentation. And that's from Kemi, for making us reflect on how our stories should be told. Keep comments coming. Let's just talk about what Jeremy just presented, what you heard, and then we move on. And for the technical team, just alert me when we are done with our photo props. So someone said AI is addressing the many constraints from the many tasks of the communications professional. And Eunice is saying that judgment should come before storytelling. And that's from Eunice from Nigeria. We also have a comment from, I think one of my key points is that beyond the programs and campaigns, I think I've read that already. Just keep your comments coming. Let's get interactive and let's share what we are learning on this session. All right. Let's move on. And thank you so much, Isoga. Now we are moving to the heart of today's summit, our fireside chat. And I'm joined by two leaders who sit at the intersection of communications, trade, and enterprise across emerging markets. I guess you want to know who is on the panel, and I'm privileged to introduce Edinam Afua Adjei, who is a strategic communications and stakeholder engagement leader with over 13 years of experience spanning corporate communications, governance, and international trade, as well as investment promotion. She is Executive Director and President of Brazil-Ghana Chamber of Commerce, where she leads initiatives strengthening bilateral trade and investment between Ghana and Brazil. She is so fluent in English and Portuguese, and Edinam's work centers on using authentic storytelling and strategic engagement to build trust and unlock opportunities for sustainable growth. Let's welcome Edinam to our fireside chat. Our next panelist is Lars Voedisch. He is the founder and group CEO of Precious Communications, an award-winning regional strategic communications consultancy. He has over 20 years of expertise in growing, managing, and defending leading brands' reputation from an in-house and agency perspective as consultant, trainer, and conference or webinar or podcast host. Together with the team at Precious Communications, Lars has also provided top-level strategic direction to over 500 startups and scale-ups, as well as venture capital firms, including more than 20 unicorns, supporting funding rounds, mergers and acquisition activity, and IPOs. He is also a Forbes Council's member and contributor. He's worked with some of the most exciting brands, just to mention a few are the Castle City, Coca-Cola, International, Lufthansa, McAfee, Procter & Gamble, and lastly, United Nations. Lars is a sought-after trainer and speaker, and he's also into strategic communications, speaking with worldwide engagement. Prior to starting Precious Communications in 2012, he worked with companies like Hill and Knowlton Strategies as executive director, and also DHL and also the corporate communication managers for DHL. He is the president of APAC in Germany after serving multiple roles as a journalist across print and broadcast. Now, let's welcome Edinam and Lars. Edinam and Lars, you are welcome. Now, let's get into our fireside chat.
Thank
To
you.
our audience, I will encourage you to drop in all your comments, your questions, your suggestions, anything that you have for our panelists, and we will take it from there. So, well, there is nothing that ladies first. So I'm going to start with Edinam. Edinam, you have a mantra that says that building trust and culture through authentic communication. Now, when you think about emerging markets, what is the biggest narrative gap between how these markets are perceived globally and the reality you experience on the ground?
Hi, everyone. And hi, Angela. Thank you very much for the question. And I would say that when we look at the emerging markets, we look at the stories that are told out there. One of the biggest gap that I see is the gap between the reality and what is visible. So let me break that down. We all notice how our stories as emerging markets, especially the African continent, is being told by everyone in a way that more often than not, it's not tasteful for us. And it's not tasteful because they are entirely untrue, but it's because stories have different angles. And I like it when Jeremy talked about the fact that the dominant lens, okay, is what becomes the thing. It becomes what everybody else sees. But as emerging markets or as a continent, the African continent, we are beyond those stories. And so what do we see? This is the gap that I see. There are fantastic things that are happening in emerging markets. There are people that are innovating. You go to Nigeria and the creative industry is booming. You come to Ghana and we have a very solid tourism and diaspora sector. You go to Asia and they are doing a lot of wonderful things. However, these stories are not the stories that are being told. And so these stories are not visible. And that's where the gap comes in. And so what we have to do as communicators to actually close this gap is for us to tell the stories that we want to be out there. Because obviously, if you are not telling your stories the way that you want others to see it, those out there will tell it. And more often than not, the stories that they tell, of course, are through their own angles, and they end up being unpleasant to us. I want us also to look at it this way. In our attempt at closing these gaps, we are not saying that you should go overly painting these emerging markets, in such a light or in so much positivity that is far from the reality. What I'm trying to say is that we are going to pick on the potential of these emerging markets and make sure that those stories are told so that with time, investors get attracted to these potentials. Not that we are trying to change the perception per se, but we are trying to give them something beyond what is already out there. And we need to also know that silence is also a narrative, which means that once we keep quiet about the stories out there, once we decide that we are not going to make visible the potential that these continents or emerging markets have, once Nigeria decides that it's not going to be telling its stories of its wonderful, amazing creative industries, it is still communicating. It is telling the world that those other stories that are out there are true. And those stories represent the only angle that the country or these emerging economies need to be seen. And so, yes, the gap is that of reality, which goes beyond what has been amplified out there.
Great, thank you so much. One thing I picked from this is that you said silence is also a narrative. And therefore, if we don't tell our stories, if we don't share the beautiful and innovative stories we have, the other ones that are already talking about emerging markets will be what is imprinted in people's head. And that is the gap. We need to share our stories that we have. Thank you so much. Lars, let me move to you. I mean, you always talk about tomorrow is about stories you imagine. That is what people think about the emerging markets, what people imagine, what people have read. So for you, when you think about emerging markets, what is the biggest narrative gap between how these markets are perceived globally and the reality on the ground, or your experience on the ground?
Thank you. So I think I'll I'll start with an African proverb that I learned last year at Kenya, right? Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And that's what we see all around all the time. Until maybe now. It was the Western dominance, especially American-led dominance. And I think that is changing massively. And that benefits emerging markets. I'm originally from Europe and spent the last 20 plus years in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, right? Emerging markets often are defined by what they lack, where they have to play catch up, or what's the risk, dependency, fragmentation. And why is that? Because the hunter set the benchmark, set the framework. So the way to get out of that is ignore or build your own kind of benchmarks and frameworks. Because in the reality, emerging markets are moving faster. They're winning, not defending usually. They are fast adopters, full of entrepreneurs. And a lot of times you have entrepreneurs for the lack of structured jobs. You are leapfrogging in emerging markets, you're leapfrogging legacy systems. And I'll give you the example. In Germany was proud for the longest time. It has one of the best ISDN networks. But that technology is in the ground, but like 40 years old, right? Then everybody talks about fiber optics. Well, in developing markets, in emerging markets, everybody's mobile first, mobile only, right? So that's kind of already kind of a framework shift where if everything is built for the desktop, it ignores economies where everything is built on mobile phone screens, just to give you an idea, right? So markets transform much faster than their reputations, but also by markets trying too much to conform to the frameworks that are set there. I think that's one of the key things. Unfortunately, the speed of change that we recognize is much faster than the speed of perception change, because that normally changes by generations. And it also changes by those that want a change, right? If the biggest budgets in marketing are still sitting on the west or east coast of the US, if most of global revenues for a P&G or a Unilever or any company is still there, then by default, they're only looking at growth from small percentages. But for them, a lot of times it's more of a defense play than welcoming new players. So I think right now we're actually in that wonderful period where through technology, through AI, through mobile phones, through social media, through also different global trade flows, we have a massive rebalancing. And I think that's actually a wonderful opportunity to think about, not so much about what do we lack, but where do we leap? And I think that's one of the main mindset shifts that we have to think about from where we're playing catch up to where we're actually better and being proud about it. Because it's a different journey. For too long, it has been about copying somebody else's story and trying to fit in. And then by default, you fail, right? So the emerging market story nowadays, it's about what can we do different? Because sometimes also not having that legacy is a big benefit, like in technology, in culture, and things that you do differently. And I think that's the key thing about sometimes just giving a damn. Sorry to say that, right? Do your thing, be proud about it, and say about how do you want to go on this journey for the future with me, instead of focusing on this is our past where we didn't do well. So if we really, as emerging markets communicators, want to go there, then yes, we have to accept that they're reference frames, but they can't be the only grounding we have. has to be the combination of how do we make palatable on where we actually leap, where we succeed, about the amazing stories that we are building. Because otherwise it's a gross domestic income per person discussion that it's hard to beat. Well, Singapore is an exception because we have banks here, but I think that's for me the key thing about like shift on framework, shift on time frame. Look into the future, look about the amazing things that we're going to build and talk about that instead of just being caught into somebody else's past.
Awesome. There is the need for us to have a mindset shift. From what do we lack to where do we lead? And as people, we can always refer to what has been said already, but we need to build on it for future reference. Thank you, Lars, for this important reminder and session. Let me remind you that the chat is open within your questions, your suggestions, your comments, so that during the Q&A sessions, we will read it out aloud and get our speakers to speak to it. Now, let me move to my second question. I'll start with Edinam and then I'll move to Lars again. So Edinam, you worked at the intersection of trade with where you said now investment and then strategic communication. In your experience, how does storytelling influence investor confidence and economic partnerships?
Okay, so we all know that obviously for anyone to make an investment, they think about so many things. And of course, investment is ultimately about confidence, and strategic storytelling is what would take an investor into that confidence level to make a decision whether they want to enter into an emerging market, they want to partner with a company or not. We know for sure there's no way any investor is going to, set out without making any risk analysis. And so the numbers are important. The market size, the regulations in the country or the emerging market they are trying to enter, the infrastructure, the risk, the people. These are fundamentals that public relations or communications cannot change. These are things that need to exist in these emerging markets already, or not. And the investor would definitely look at these. However, when it comes to strategic storytelling, what it seeks to do is to pick these numbers that are more often than not very abstract sometimes and make them tangible. And so strategic communications will come in through storytelling, of course, and be asking the questions that actually move the investor to take the final decision. And these questions will go beyond the numbers. What happens? Can I trust the people behind these institutions? Can I trust these numbers? Who in these sectors? So for example, if you're coming to Ghana and the Ghana Investment Promotion Authority has told you that there has been an increase in about 40% in the agri sector, this may sound abstract. The job of the strategic storytelling is to bring this number home, is to be able to make it tangible for the investor. And so you'll be telling stories like, okay, within the agricultural sector, these are the companies that are thriving. These are the things that they are doing. These are the risks that are involved if you should come into this sector. And you will be able to put some flesh on the numbers. And with this kind of angle, it makes it easier for any investor to actually make the final decision with the numbers. But it's also very important for us to note that PR or strategic storytelling does not come out of a vacuum. And so the fundamentals must always be there. They must exist. What PR does with the strategic storytelling is to amplify these fundamentals and to decide that these people need to hear about this story at this time and for this reason. Without these fundamentals, there wouldn't be any need to tell any story, because what you'll be doing is probably fabricating stories because what you are talking about do not exist. And so it's important that in our quest to tell stories, strategic stories that would help investors come into these emerging markets, we need to ensure that our homework is done right. We need to ensure that the fundamentals exist And when we are trying to amplify them, all we are doing is to be able to strategically decide who needs to hear it, what do they need to hear, at what time, and what do we need to tell them to make a decision. And that is how strategic storytelling actually helps when it comes to attracting investors into the emerging market. Angela.
Awesome. Thank you for that submission. And let me ask a follow-up question, just to make it relatable to us. So can you share an example where strategic communication directly changed perceptions or unlocked a business opportunity with where you sit?
Okay, so with where I sit at the Chamber of Commerce, basically formed or started because we wanted to fill in a gap. And so there are several stories, one of which I can tell is the fact that Ghana and Brazil have had diplomatic ties for decades. And that has been the case of we are friends. We know Ghana, we know Brazil, and that ends it. And so in the absence of being deliberately telling the stories of these two countries to position them to benefit from this diplomatic relations, it just remains friendship. And so what does the chamber do and what have we been doing over the years? We have decided that we need to tell the stories of why a business person from Brazil needs to look at Ghana beyond the stories that are not so pleasant to us. What are these stories? Ghana is an African country, and so if a Brazilian looks at Ghana, they're probably looking at, oh, that poor African country with a lot of its population going through hunger, there's sicknesses all over the place. No. Now we say no. There are a lot of potentials that we have on the continent. And so the work that I do has been to, for example, say, looking at the government of Ghana now trying to promote a 24-hour economy. We have a lot of free zone areas that comes with benefits for investors. We also have the manufacturing sector of Ghana that is doing all it has to do to attract people to come in. And so when I am telling the story of Ghana to the Brazilian, what I do is to pick these potentials that already exist, that are already have structures, and try to project them through the trade missions that we do, through business webinars where we invite government agencies like the Ghana Investment Promotion Authority or the Ghana Export Promotion Authority, and they come on board. We invite potential investors who are looking to come into Ghana. And in these sections, we do not go talking about the fact that Ghana is a beautiful country, Ghana is peaceful, and we do not do these generic kind of stories because there is a potential that our aim is to sell out there. And we do the same thing with Brazil. Over the years, people have been in Ghana and thought of Brazil as the football nation, World Cup, you hear Brazil. But for some reason, and that's where it ends, with the beautiful beaches, beautiful people. Probably you're thinking of tourism, you want to look at Brazil, and that's where it ends. But Brazil is a huge nation with huge potentials. And so what the Chamber has been doing over the years has been also to list the potential areas that can be strategic places for both Ghana and Brazil to have like a marriage. And how have we been doing that? We have picked some of the trade missions and trade fairs that happen in Brazil. For example, recently in the beginning of the year, we took a mission, including the Ministry of Agriculture here in Ghana, to Brazil. It has to do with an agricultural technological fair. And sometimes beyond just speaking about it, it's good that people actually travel and see what is on the ground. And so at this fair, it opened a new chapter for Ghana. For the people that went on this mission in the agricultural sector, they saw how similar the two countries are in terms of the weather. And we see how Brazil has advanced in terms of technology when it comes to agric. And Ghana is trying to get there. And so in this kind of partnership, it became a reality for most of the people that were on the mission. They saw firsthand the kind of potential that the country has. And so beyond all the other perceptions that they had of the country, they had a chance to see a different angle, a different story of Brazil. The same way when the mission, the trade and investment mission came to Ghana, they came and then they were able to interact with institutions. They were able to see that beyond that poverty, and sickness and that dark narrative that they have of the continent and of the country, there is huge potential. And it's not a potential that is, come and help me, I need help. No, it's potential that is, this is what I bring to the table, this is what you also have, and this is what we can do together. And so this is how, as a chamber, we have been trying to actually bridge this gap using strategic communication and storytelling that portrays the potentials that each of these countries have.
Great insight. And one thing I picked from you is that as professionals, we should be able to strategically identify potentials for future partners, and we should make all the abstract numbers more tangible so that it helps the investor to take decisions. Thank you so much, Edinam, for that insightful contribution. So Lars, I am coming to you. Looking at your profile, you've advised hundreds of startups, scale-ups, and global brands. What separate organizations that have successfully shaped? What separate organization that successfully shaped their own narrative from those that allow others to define them? And you started a conversation around that we should try to tell our own story rather than let people tell our story. So what's your take on that?
Thanks for asking. It's depends a little bit on the stage and the maturity of the company, right? Usually you say, never give other brands airtime, never mention other brands in PR or comms. There's an exception. If you're an unknown brand in a market, you normally try to associate yourself with a much bigger brand. And there are two examples on how that works at the very early stage on building trust by association. One is, everybody to some extent in a startup space was, we are the Google of something. Why? Because Google is the reference model that, okay, it helps to frame things. That might work. Second one is, especially at the early stage, just sign MOUs, memorandums of understanding. They don't have any consequences if you ask me, but they mean that, we are the real thing. Somebody else is okay that we are associated with them. It could be a business chamber. It could be an association. It could be a country. It could be a ministry. It could be a bigger brand. That's especially early on. You want to be associated with entities that have already established trust early on, right? Then when you move in there, the biggest mistake, to put it from that way, that startups, brands at any level do is talking about they want to be everything for everybody all the time, everywhere. Not even Coca-Cola can afford that, right? The more you try to please everybody, you don't please anybody. The more you try to be relevant for everybody, the less you're relevant for anybody, right? So I think that's the key thing, especially for brands, to be very clear what's the market they're for. And then pivot if it works. Anybody knows, the famous Nokia story, who's a gone brand now in the consumer space, but they started with rubber boots. Or Abercrombie and Fitch, that American kind of fashion brand, they were the first company that imported mahjong tiles from Asia into the US. Nobody knows about it anymore, right? So go with the flow. The other key thing is have a clear point of view. And that's normally where the spokespeople, the CEO have to come out and say, I'm willing to have a point of view that differentiates us. And by differentiating, that also means not everybody might agree, and that's okay. You know, there are tons of examples where a brand stood up and said something about, we are supporting this movement or this athlete or whatever, and then people made a whole movement against them. Normally what happens is the people that actually agree with you will become much more loyal fans, customers, and your revenue will go up. Because sometimes in a brand journey and a company journey, you have your fans and hardcore fans, and then you have the ones that will never buy from you. Sorry, my computer was just switching something, and I thought Zoom was gone. It just switched from day to nighttime because it's 7:22 official sunset time in Singapore. So the so it's you have your loyal customers early on. You have the people that will never buy from you, and you have the fence sitters. Never try to convince the people that will never buy from you or partner with you, right? I mean, that's the thing. So be very clear on what you stand for and go for it, because then that makes you authentic as a brand, as a leadership, and be consistent about it. Don't try to be, you know, wishy-washy that way. Then in a journey, and again, it depends on where you stand. There's a fantastic book about crossing the chasm. It's about especially tech companies. In the early days, you are only going for brands or partners or clients that are willing to experiment, that are willing to take a risk. That's early on, and that's okay. But it also means everything you do is highly customized. It's not scalable. If you move into a more larger frame of potential customers, you have to standardize. At that point, you play a different role in your communications. And then to wrap it up on that one is, make sure that whatever your stakeholders, your customers, your investors, your employees, the authorities, the regulators find matches up. Especially in an AI age, that's more important than ever. Because what AI does is, it first goes at your own content, your website. Then it looks into what else is out there, any evidence to back up your claims. And it looks, LinkedIn is now one of the most cited sources in B2B on AI. And it looks into what does the media say about you. And AI has something that it does very, very well. It tries to condense a lot of content into the truth, the perceived truth. And if your website content, your CEO speeches and posts, and what the media says are the same, it's very easy for AI to condense that one truth. If your salespeople and your campaigns and your CEO and your CTO and what you say today on a topic and tomorrow on a topic in the media is different, you can't condense it. AI can't condense it, and people can't condense it. I'll give you an example on that kind of non-alignment. There was this famous financial institution called the Silicon Valley Bank. And a few years ago, actually just 2 or 3 years ago, they made an announcement to the investor community about a refinancing operation. But in this day and age, a communication meant for just one community or stakeholder group will not be separated from anybody else. Anybody can find everybody. So that actually caused a massive panic amongst their customers and more or less a bank run that bankrupted them, right? So they're very practical things. Build one narrative that connects, because then people can actually condense it themselves. They can remember it. They know what you stand for. AI helps you to amplify it because it can do that. And it's also not confusing. If you say this today and your CEO says this tomorrow, and then your CFO says something else on Thursday, what is the truth? You don't have anything to stand for. So it's really like about clarity, consistency, and then have proof points that back it up, right? So if you say we're the fastest growing African country in this, make sure you back it up. The world has been burned by claims without evidence, right? And there are a few tricks to do that. Everybody can be a market leader as long as you define the market. Precious Communications is the absolute global leading PR firms in Singapore that have a CEO that was born in Germany. If I define the market like that, I'm the market leader, right? So you can slice and dice it in your favor. And ideally, you have the proof points from customers, from external parties that have trust, that back up your story. And that's how it comes together. Early stage, be a little bit more bold. Don't be afraid to not please everybody. Have a clear point of view, and then kind of repeat it. In comms, that's the kind of thing. Have that one journey that you're on and stick to it, unless the whole company changes course. Yeah, so I think that's really, it's about, you shape a narrative when others start repeating it for you. And others can only repeat it for you if it's very clear what you want them to repeat.
Great. Thank you, Lars, for this great information. I mean, I think you've answered my second question when I was going to ask about the mistake organizations do. And to just summarize what you just said, I mean, as we tell our stories within our emerging markets, we need to be authentic, because within this AI age, stories should connect with our stakeholders. We should make sure that there is clarity, there is consistency, and proof points to back it up, so that we can always go back to our customers or our future partners for that. Thank you so much for that. So we are getting to the closing part of the fireside chat. And before I let Lars, for you to relax or rest, let me just ask you this. With your experience with all the things you know about emerging markets, can you please give us one piece of advice to business leaders in emerging markets who wants to attract investment, partnership, and global opportunities? What role should strategic storytelling play in their growth strategy?
Sorry, that's for Edinam or for me?
Do I repeat it again? Okay, let me just, so I just want you to give us a piece of, like, if I am an emerging leader, a business leader, what advice would you give me, or would you give us that will help us attract investments, partnerships, and global opportunities in our markets?
Don't mix up feel-good stories with clear investment stories. We do a lot of work in renewable energies or green financing. And the moment you make it sound like charity, then it's a charity story. Either you have an investment pitch or you don't. Very simple. There are a few overlaps, but at the end of it, that's the key thing. Either you have a good investment opportunity, you don't have. The higher the risk, the higher the returns. It's very actually straightforward. There are benchmarks for all of that, and see who backs you up. What guarantees do you give? What do you have proof in the past that makes it more realistic that you succeed? It's I think has nothing to do with emerging markets or not. Emerging markets normally have to pay a risk kind of surplus on that one. But at the end of the day, it's a very straightforward Excel sheet story. If you ask me, that's the financial score. With getting people excited, create the typical FOMO thing. You don't want to miss out on that train. Get in before it's too late. And it always sells easier if people are excited about it, right? In general, there's that one thing I tell my team all the time. The one trademark characteristic that every successful salesperson, and a storyteller is a salesperson selling a story, has in common is enthusiasm. Are you enthusiastic about the story you're telling? Are you passionate? Can you make sure that the other people in the room, on the call, on the other side of an email, get a glimpse of that passion, that fire, and get equally kind of excited? Because that's so much easier to get their interest, right? So it's that combination of, yes, you need to make sure that they're excited about the opportunity, that they believe in you as the leader, that you can deliver on what you promise. But at the end of the day, it also comes down to numbers.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we don't have to get things mixed up, and we also have to show enthusiasm in the stories we tell. So thank you so much for that insightful comment. So Edinam, let me come to you with my next closing question. Many business leaders still see PR as a support function rather than a growth driver. What would you say to a CEO who is unsure about investing in strategic communication?
So this is something that any strategic communications professional has experienced and cries about. And so my simple question to the CEO before giving any piece of advice will be, what is the cost of actually having people, potential investors, misunderstand you? So that's a critical question. What is the cost of having people out there that you want your business strategy to get to actually misunderstand you? What is the cost? What's the cost involved in the investment that could have come that did not come because they didn't understand your strategy? And many people think about cost when it comes to communication. And so they finish cooking up the story, the business strategy, and decide to invite communications professionals to come in, pick up the story, and run with it. But more often than not, you will notice that this goes beyond communication. It's a strategy, it's a business strategy issue. And so if communication is not seated at the table when these strategies are being made, it becomes very hard for them to run away with these stories and reach the potential investors that you're looking out for. And so the advice will always be, consider the cost involved if your story is not told the way that it ought to be, if your story is not reaching the potential client or investors, if your story is misinterpreted, and this will cost the organization or company so much more than inviting a communications professional to be at the table when these business decisions are being made, when the strategy for business is being made. And we have seen this clearly of organizations that sits at a point, decide that this is the story that should go out there without the comms or the strategic storyteller. And then once they are done, you realize that there's some kind of confusion in the story that is going out there. And we know that if you want to go out there and attract investors into our country or into our companies, we need to be very clear. Like was mentioned earlier on, what are we looking out for? What do we have to offer? What are we already doing? What do we have ready to receive these investors? If these are not targeted well and the story is not told well, it means that all the effort in sitting and creating this business strategy will go to zero. And so, yes, it costs organizations so much more when they decide to have the strategic communications or storyteller sit elsewhere, instead of sitting at the table where the decisions are being made and looking at the fact that they are businesses and obviously they are in to make profit and their return on investment needs to be high. I believe that when they do and look at this cost to the organization, they will naturally have to make a decision where they have to bring these storytellers to the table. And another thing I'd like to mention is that we do not wait until these stories are cooked before we start telling them. So we look at strategic storytelling as reputation building, just that they have business objectives, right? And we know what reputation building is. You do not wait and stand up one day because you need investors and then you start trying to tell your story. No, you tell these stories right at the beginning. So if it's a company, you are telling these stories. You are not saying that you should keep always talking about my company is good, is the best thing that ever happened to anyone. No, you are telling what you are doing, how you are doing it, what you intend to do with that, which kind of investors are you trying to attract, what do you have on the table, what would the person gain from coming to partner with you. And these are stories that need to be told right from the start and not when we actually think that it's time to open our doors for investors. It's like reputation. And so it needs to be built over time. And when we talk about building reputation, you know very well that you need to have the strategic storytellers together with you, telling the story along the way. And the good thing is that once you start telling these stories right from the beginning, by the time you really do need investors and want to open your doors for them, you would have something to show. You're not going to be going to the table with zero. You're going to be going to the table with something that is a potential. And who better than the strategic storyteller to be in that seat and journey along with you instead of you packaging something and handing over that to them and asking them to run with them. Thank you.
It's getting interesting. It's getting more educative and informative, but we are running out of time. It's left with one last question that I would pose to Lars. But before then, to our delegates and all those on the call, please fill the survey form and follow our channels that is in the link on Facebook, on X, on LinkedIn. And we want to hear from you. We just want to get your feedback. So kindly fill the feedback forms for us. And the key takeaway is from Edinam's submission is that we should see our stories as we are building reputation. We should start from the scratch and share the success stories as we go in. And then we should always, to the leaders or business owners or CEOs, strategic communication starts from the strategy building. And communications of public relations professionals should be brought to the table as we build the strategy. Thank you so much, Edinam. And last, this is my last question for you, and then we move on to the next session because of our time. So to you, I think maybe for Edinam, you can also come in after last submissions. What's one narrative that business leaders in emerging markets need to stop telling, and one that need to start telling? What should they stop, and which one should they start? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's related to what I shared before and what we're discussing here, right? It's stop about kind of asking for acknowledgement about look how far we've come. Because look how far we've come puts you in a benchmark, in a race where you're playing catch up, right? It implies that you're catching up. It uses someone else's benchmark. So that's what I said at the very beginning. It's about seeking recognition rather than demonstrating relevance. So that's the stop. The start is look what we are building and why it matters to you. And it's okay if it doesn't matter and it's not relevant for everybody. That's totally okay. You won't get every bank to be interested to give you a loan. That's the same thing, right? Why do they believe in you? So it's about that confidence in their future facing. And, you know, it's like Lagos doesn't need to become a London. It shouldn't be, right? Jakarta doesn't need to become Silicon Valley. It's like really like, what are we doing differently? What can others learn from us? And why does this travel? Why does it have legs? Why should others get excited about it? It's that passion thing that matters. So in a nutshell, it's really about stop asking the world of recognizing that you had a tough journey and you've come so far. It's really about inviting people to join the journey to what's next. Give them a reason to care about where you're going and why they shouldn't miss that boat.
Great punch. People, we should move from just being recognized and up to the success end. Thank you, Lars. Edinam, would you want to just give some last comments on this?
Yes, just to add on to what he said, I think that they need to stop telling the story of give us a chance. And I think that's basically what he said. And move to this is the opportunity. And, you know, in our quest to get and attract investment, more often than not, we see that we end up talking about our lack. You know, we talk of the things that we do not have, and then we kind of look miserable, look vulnerable, and try to have people give us. Whereas what they need to be talking about is the opportunities that are available, what they have built, what is available to those that are coming. So that, like I mentioned earlier on, they are coming to the table with something substantive and not with zero. Another important thing that they need to stop doing is the fact that we are not telling stories as propaganda. We are telling stories to be believed, okay? So you're not doing propaganda in the storytelling. And so instead of trying to go all out painting the situation so bad, we don't have this, or trying to overly polish the situation at hand. And so you know the situation in the country. You know you have probably energy crisis. You know it for sure. It is something that is visible. It's happening. And then because you want to attract investors, you start speaking in such a way that quote and unquote a politician will, trying to beautify what does not exist. And so they need to stop telling those stories and build stories that are credible and not just to, you know, be overly positive and overly polished stories that they believe would immediately attract investors. The investors today are quite sophisticated. And so, like I mentioned, beyond the numbers, they look beyond those things. And so when you start fabricating some of these stories, they are able to see through them. And this is going to be a limitation for them actually coming to invest in your country or in your market, and which actually ends up defeating the purpose. And so, yes, stop saying, give us a chance, and start speaking the language of, here is the opportunity, here is what we have built, here is the problem we are solving, here is the evidence, and do have the evidence, here is what we have to offer, and this is where we need your partnership.
Thank you. Thank you. And this is from Vicky Raj. Says, thank you, Jeremy and Lars, and insightful talks from both of you. And from Derek J saying, great information and presentation Edinam. And we are reminding everybody to share your feedback about the summit by clicking on the feedback link that we have put in the chat box. As Mo is saying that is asking whether this is recorded and the link can be shared. And I think, Edinam, you mentioned about homes people not being at the table at the strategy development are brought in at last. And as Mo is saying that this matter is actually a nightmare for communications experts. He's also, as Mo is also saying, well said, Lars, and this has been great, and from Archibald Adams, this has been a great learning time. And thank you for your comments. And thank you, Lars and Edinam. Your insightful contributions will help us to make meaningful decision in telling our stories. It's not all about propaganda. It's not about propaganda, but it's about sharing realities, credible and transparent stories to attract investors and partners. Thank you so much. To all of us, I think Edinam and Lars they have given us a working playbook, not just a conversation, and we can actually open it and use it wherever we find ourselves. Now we have about 15 minutes for our questions, so I'll encourage everybody, drop in the chat, draw your questions, your suggestions, drop it in the chat, and then we will share it with the prospective speakers to answer that. I think we have the first one. I have the first one. Let me just check that, and then let's move on. And that's to Jeremy. Jeremy, an anonymous attendee is asking, what is an emerging market? Then if we define what is an emerging market? Please come again. I think it's not gelling well with who defines the end looks like it's not clear. And the second one, so anonymous attendee, please come back with your question again, and then we'll ask Jeremy. The second one is, how do you make your uplines like your bosses see what you see about a campaign, especially when success of that campaign is dependent on the collective energy of everyone? And that's to Jeremy and whoever can also contribute with our speakers. I take the question again. How do you make your uplines like your bosses see what you see about a campaign, especially when the success of that campaign is dependent on the collective energy of everyone? So, Jeremy, would you want to take it, and then if other speakers have contributions, they make it?
Just so I hear you right, how do you see the campaign, given that the success of it is due to the collective energy of the organization? Was that the question?
Okay, so let me just reframe it so that we all are aligned. So it's just like a subordinate is asking, how does he make his or her boss see what he or she sees about a campaign success that is dependent on the collective energy of everyone?
Well, I think I hope it doesn't sound like a cop-out, but I do think that there's various nuances of an organization that I sometimes could be having a sweeping statement that I don't know about. But I think the key point is we we need to go back to first understanding how we want to frame the story. So that's one. And we need to be super sure about it because now, as I mentioned early on as well, we do have access to research and data at scale. So remember, if I say that a lot of those things that AI can help us do, we do have it closer to our fingertips. Secondly, I think that from an AI perspective as well, we can also show in most occasions how we can tell that story and how AI can predict it resonates as well. So with a combination of two, I still maintain that today we have technology and data that can help us make those decisions and be in the right position to make the judgment call on how best to tell the story. I hope that answers the question, Angela.
Great. Yeah. All right. Okay, Edinam, and then Lars, would you want to share something?
Yes, Angela. So I just wanted to add that for most communications professionals in many organizations, this is from my observation, more often than not, their campaigns sometimes sit at a place, whereas the business objectives are also seated at a place. What this means is that it makes it extremely hard sometimes.
No, still going on.
It makes it hard sometimes to be able to bring who they are calling the CEO or the leader whenever the comms team is working on these campaigns and to be able to say this, to talk about the success of these campaigns. And so what I usually advise is that make sure that whatever campaign that you are set out to do, that campaign is actually linked to the business objective. So if it's a bank, for example, what is the business objective of the bank that year? And once these are incorporated into your comms strategy, it will be very clear all the people that need to come together to ensure that the success of this campaign is real and is visible for all. The only way you can do that is making sure that whatever campaign that you're doing is actually linked. The outcomes of that campaign is linked to the overall business strategy of the organization. It makes it much easier for you to present the outcomes or the findings and ensure that they do understand, because you'll be speaking the language of business and not just the language of communication. Thank you.
Thank you, Edinam, for the contribution. Please keep your comments, your questions coming while we are still in that session. We would love to hear from you as well. So don't forget to fill in our survey just to let us know how the summit went and give us your feedback. That is very important. We still have some few minutes for questions. So if you have, just drop it in there and continue to follow PRWF via all our social media handles. That's Facebook, WhatsApp, X, LinkedIn, and all. So we are still waiting for more questions, but before that one, before we close, maybe before we get another question from our delegates, to our people, if somebody is now starting to develop stories for one of their markets, where does he or she start from? If, let's say, a new person is entering into an emerging market and want to share story to make an impact, where should he or she start from?
start with your target audience. Very simple. What's the watering holes that they gather, right? It's like you're hunting for customers. So where does your prey gather? How do you get there? Very simple. And then be very clear on what do you bring to the market? Why does your audience need you? In B2B, it's very simple. Nobody needs a solution before they're aware that they have a problem. So the oldest trick in the B2B marketing and comms book is elevate a problem, and then you have magically, like a rabbit, the solution for that. And you have to show, like, why is it relevant for them? Why is it relevant now? The urgency has to be important. And why should they trust you? Because, we've seen it also too many times, like somebody wants to enter a market, but nobody's waiting for you, right? So it's like, why do you have something that they could survive without for a decade? So in the past, it was often kind of a Western brand kind of advantage because it seemed to be a little bit more aspirational. Now it doesn't need to be, right? Because what does the marketing manager in Cincinnati know about my needs in Da Nang in Vietnam? Maybe not that much, right? Versus somebody from Thailand coming in, say, hey, we're very similar, we're neighbors, and because we know that the climate is different, this skincare product works better. Or because we know that the internet connection is not as stable as in New York, we have a solution that works for the realities that you have there, right? So it's, in a nutshell, know your audience, know how to get to them, build trust, and make sure that it's relevant for them. And don't come in as arrogant, like, hey, we are the latest thing, and the world has been waiting for you. The world is not waiting for new products. B2B, it's very simple. What you offer them helps them to make money, save money, or is a regulatory requirement, and make money beats everything else. But most solutions are actually more or less, we help you to save efficiency, and people have been bored to death by those claims. Consumers, it's slightly easier, right? It's the typical Maslow pyramid of needs. Do I make your life more convenient? Do I make you prettier? Do I make you feel more confident? And what do I know? If I would now go into an African market, I wouldn't know the market enough to even know what people really want, right? So do your homework, know what your audiences want.
Awesome. That is getting to know your target audience before you get in there with your story. So thank you so much, Lars and Edinam, and thank you to everyone who commented, who joined, who made this possible. Thank you. But before we close, let's make sure this feels like the room it actually is, global and connected. So in the chat, tell us one organization or one person you would like to connect with from today's session, and then provide your LinkedIn addresses for connections. This is the moment to build the network and the way you would have done it if you are meeting face to face. So drop in your whoever you want to connect with, and then share your LinkedIn address, and then you take it from there. So as we are doing all those things, I will hand over to Stella from PRWF for a formal vote of thanks covering this experience, covering our summit, covering this global summit. And then she just leads us into next year's experience in PR Global. So Stella, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Angela. It has really been an impactful session. I've learned a lot of things, from our keynote to the fireside chat, and to our amazing host. I just want to say thank you to everyone, to our partner, PRCA, APAC. Thank you so much. And we are very grateful to Tech for Dev. They've been our technical partner for all 5 webinars, from webinar 1 to webinar 5. They've been with us. We've moved along this journey together. Again, to all our partners for all 5 webinars, and to all our speakers, we are indeed very grateful to have you being part of the conversation, sharing your insight and your expertise. because we believe that these are convenings that make the profession better. These are summits that drive the conversation of why public relations and communications is important for organizations to implement. PR and communication is not just a function, it's a strategic, and the results are well to do because we see them for global and even emerging markets. So once again, thank you all very much. And to everyone in the room, we would like to formally invite you to the next, that is 2027, Experiencing Public Relations. We want everyone in the room to be part of it. 2027 is going to be massive. We say that the Experiencing PR Summit is a business conference because, again, OS better speaks about the importance of public relations that business owners, HNIs, CEOs that have utilized public relations and they've seen the impact. For 2027, we are going all out and we're doing a 3-day summit. We have the first day, which is the main conference. For the second day, we have business visits and mentorship for younger professionals. And for the third day, we'll be winding it down with a networking dinner. And we are inviting everyone. It's a global event. So we're inviting everyone for logistic, everything that needs to be in place. We are ready on it. And we'd like to invite you to all our speakers. And please reach out to us if you'd like to be part of 2027, and we'll partner with you, we'll collaborate to deliver the summit. Once again, I really want to say thank you. And to PRWF, the convener, we're really grateful for the work that PRWF keeps doing for the industry. And again, thank you all so much for joining. For our participants that have joined in from Ghana, from Hong Kong, from Singapore, from Nigeria, we say thank you so much. Thank you all. That is it from the foundation.
Thank you, Stella. I'm already looking forward or anticipating experiencing PR Global 2027. So as we close, and thank you to everybody, as Stella has said, as we close, I have 2 things I want us to carry with us. The first one is that just think that, or remember that narrative is not a decoration to development. It is rather an economic infrastructure. And the second one is that for storytelling, for us to ensure that we get our stories out well and then get the impact we want, we need to own the stories and ensure that they reach the right audiences, just like Lars ended his speaking. So thank you for spending some hours of your day with PRWF and with all of us. Please stay connected, connect out through our social media handles, Facebook, LinkedIn, X, all the social media handles that has been put in the chat. Let's keep talking to each other and let's watch out for experiencing PR 2027. On behalf of PRWF, its partners, and every speaker who joined today, I am Angela Kwaa, and this has been Experiencing PR Global Summit 2026. Please go tell your story. And I think before we end, I don't know, the technical team, can we all put our cameras and then take a group picture, whoever joined, wherever you are joining from, just put on your camera for a picture taking just for storytelling as well. So once we are done, kindly let me know, and then we will call it a day. We wish everybody a successful week and have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are joining from. Thank you.